Good afternoon, dear friends. Today we have a guest speaker, Michael Buckley. I believe it's a good opportunity for all of us to hear him, and personally I think it's an honor to say a few words about him. Michael is an award-winning Canadian journalist, a documentary filmmaker, and author. He co-authored the first English language guidebook to Tibet in 1986. He is one among the very few people who has traveled extensively in the Himalayas and Tibet since 1985 and witnessed ecocide on the Tibetan plateau firsthand. Besides his number of books on Asia and the Himalayas, he has a handful of books on Tibet, including Shangri-La, Travel to Tibet, Travel to the Himalayan Dream, Tibet, the Bread Travel Guide, Heartlands, Travels in the Tibetan World, and Eccentric Explorers. His latest book, Meltdown in Tibet, has been reviewed by well-known scholars, including Professor Robert Thurman, and been prefaced by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And so, without further ado, I would now request Ms. Sambala to follow up. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome. I first heard rumors of Michael Buckley way back in the early 1980s when I was working at the Department of Information and International Relations. So the rumor was that he was a great writer, an ardent adventurer going into Tibet, and he was one of the few people who put Tibet in the Lonely Planet guidebook. So today Michael is going to talk about his latest book called Meltdown in Tibet, and without any adding distance between the speaker and the audience, I hand over to you. Thank you. Yes.
Hello, can you hear? Good. Welcome. It's good to see everybody here this afternoon. We're sort of maybe numbers down a little bit because of Losar. But it's a pleasure to be here. And this is the book that I've just been released in India. It's a paperback, which is considerably cheaper than the American edition, which is a hardback. So they did a very nice printing job. It's got color, everything. The pages are all there. Printing job is okay. So it's a good thing that India is able to do this because it makes it a lot more accessible to a wider audience because the cost is lower. Anyway, I would like to actually start off talking about from a previous book that I did, which was called Eccentric Explorers. And one of the things that I was researching, well, the first thing that I came across for rivers in Tibet, because I'm going to talk about rivers in Tibet today, was the initial British exploration of the rivers, because they had no idea where they went. And they were very keen to find out where they went. And of course, Tibetans knew where they went, but they were not going to tell anyone. These were secret among the Tibetan nation. They didn't want people knowing where places were. So this is how the British solved the problem. They used a mala to find out where everything was. And that's for the initial British exploration. They could not get anywhere inside Tibet. They could not find a way to come in to map, and that's what they're interested in. So what they did is they sent in Indian pilgrims, people disguised as pilgrims, and the way they mapped it was that they used a mala to count out paces. So eventually, like you've got a mala has 108 beads, so they count out maybe 10 steps, they drop one bead. Another 10 steps, they drop another bead. And they keep going until they paced out a mile, which is, they calculate 2,000 paces. So the person dressed as the pilgrim would be able to walk up to Lhasa and figure exactly how many miles it was, because every time they dropped a bead, then they have the smaller beads on the side. This would calculate how many miles it was. So eventually you get, it's a very painstaking process, right? Probably the most unusual mapping process in the world. But that's not all they had, because they had the shrine, the gao that the pilgrim carries. They carried a compass hidden inside that, so they had a compass. Then they had a walking stick, and inside the walking stick was a boiling point thermometer, which is to determine altitude. And then you have the prayer wheel. And the prayer wheel was used to record all the data, because inside the prayer wheel are the mantras written on paper. But instead of mantras, what they did was they wrote down all the data. And strangely enough, this process went on for at least 20 or 30 years while the British mapped. And Tibetans never caught these people. Because if they did, there would have been big penalties. And not only that, the methods that were used by the British were recorded in the Royal Geographical Society magazine. They even told people how they did it, and they still kept sending people in. Anyway, coming to one of the explorers called Kintup. And Kintup was a illiterate tailor from Darjeeling. He was recruited by the British to go and find out where the Tsangpo went. He wanted to know, did it join to the Salween? Did it join to the Brahmaputra? They had no idea what happened. They didn't even know that there was a bend there. They had some suspicions, but anyway, they sent in this guy Kintup, and about 1880, Kintup, using this primitive equipment to pace things out. And his job, which is almost mission impossible, was to follow the Tsangpo as far as he could. And if he could follow it all the way and come back into India, that'd be fine. But if he couldn't do that, his job was to drop 500 logs into the river so that somebody would be waiting at the other end to see where the logs came out. He was going to drop like 10 logs a day over a period of 10 days, let's say. These are small logs about this big with a special marker inside. Anyway, it took him 3 years to actually, he had a lot of misadventures. It took him 3 years to actually get to the point where he could cut the logs and prepare them and put them into the river. And by this time, his supervisor had died, and there was nobody waiting for the logs at the other end. So the mission was a total failure in that way. He did discover large regions of the Tsangpo that were, not known at that point. So he got very close to the big waterfalls on the Tsangpo, and he knew a little bit about the Big Bend. Anyway, finally he made it back to India after all these adventures. He was gone for 4 years, and he was expecting like a medal from the Geographical Society and things like this, and nobody knew who he was, unfortunately. So he retreated, went back to his previous trade, which was tailoring. Anyway, my point is, in talking about this, is that 150 years ago we knew nothing. Well, the Western world knew nothing about the Tsangpo. They didn't know that we found out, as recently as the 1990s, it's the deepest canyon in the world, far bigger than the Grand Canyon, maybe 3 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. So here you have, these rivers are barely explored, it's not until 1998 or somewhere around there that they found a 100-foot waterfall on the Yalang Tsangpo. It'd been hidden for so many years. The Tibetans knew about it, but from a Western point of view, discovery of this waterfall was a major thing. And then the Chinese stepped in and said, oh, they'd found it much earlier. They did a backwards exploration thing. But you got to consider that as recently as the 1990s, we knew very little about these rivers, and now suddenly, the way the Chinese are looking at them, they're looking at as a point of exploitation rather than a point of great visual beauty, which is what these canyons could be. So in America, you've got the Grand Canyon. It's a major tourist attraction. It's well protected by laws. You've got the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. There's no such initiative in China. The way they're looking at the rivers of Tibet is purely from an exploitative point of view, which is what kind of dam can we put on this? How can we divert that water? What can we do with it? So this is a very different attitude to approach to rivers than what Tibetans would view, and how Westerners would view a canyon like this, a major canyon. And coming back to the Great Bend of the Tsangpo, I'm going to put up a map in a moment that will show you more about that. The Great Bend of the Tsangpo is actually the highest hydro potential in the world because of the big drop that comes down from, it's coming down from very high altitude and drops down into India around that area. So this has the greatest hydro potential in the world. And of course, China is looking at that because China is very power hungry. It needs all the power it can get. So they have a map, which actually I have on a website, where they've actually put a dam right at the Great Bend, which if it was ever built would be 38 gigawatts, which is, to give you an idea, the Three Gorges Dam is 22 gigawatts. So it's much, much bigger than the Three Gorges Dam, which is way and above the biggest dam in the world. So that's to give you an idea of what they're planning to do. Of course, if they ever did this, it could be a major catastrophe as well, because if it didn't work out, And if it collapsed, or if there was an earthquake or something like that, it would take out huge areas of southern Tibet and also in Arunachal. It would devastate those areas. So we're hoping they never build a dam on that Great Bend. But so far, you probably know, 2 months ago, or was it 3 months ago, China opened its first dam on the Brahmaputra, or the Yalong Sampo, which is called Jangmu Dam, and it's 510 megawatts. It's a medium-sized dam by Chinese standards, still pretty big by Western standards. And they've assured India that, of course, this will have no impact whatsoever on India. But you've got to watch Chinese propaganda because it is going to have an impact. And it's only one of 5 dams. There's 5 dams being built. That's a cascade, which is a normal thing for China to build, is a cascade. So if they build the cascade, 5 dams, that's going to alter the way the Brahmaputra operates, so the Yalong Sampo. That's not the end of it, though. That's only the beginning. So they have plans for up to 20 dams in the Yalong Sampo area or in the Yalong Sampo tributaries, right? Including dams which are bigger than the Jangmu Dam. So I tend to follow all these things as a matter of interest, but also as a matter of the fact that they're going to destroy the ecology within Tibet and potentially downstream as well. And this is rather alarming. People call me an alarmist. It's rather alarming for several reasons. The major reason is that it is so much impact downstream, on the nations downstream. And I was going to go a little bit more explanation about that later. But first I wanted to show you a map, which I can, maybe you can go to that map there. Press this one? Okay. Okay. This is a map of the major rivers of sourced in Tibet. You probably know most of the names. Some people don't know that they actually come from Tibet. They might think the Yangtze is a Chinese river. It's not. It's a Tibetan river, definitely. And the yellow is also a Tibetan river. So in all, you've got about 10 major rivers that come out of the Tibetan Plateau. The reason I blocked off the Tibetan Plateau in yellow is to show you the area that's basically occupied. Most of that area, okay, thanks. Most of that area is Tibet occupied by China. Very little of it spills into Nepal and Bhutan. You can see a little bit that goes into Bhutan and Nepal. On this area here, whoops. You just press this button here? This one. There. Okay. There's a little bit of the plateau that comes into Bhutan, northern section, and Nepal, which is also very high for hydro potential. But the majority, the major part of this is within Tibet. TAR over here, then you got Kham down here and Amdo over here, right? So if you look at this map, you can see why the Chinese are interested in Tibet as a water source. Their own water sources have been saturated. They've saturated with damming. They've saturated all of their rivers. They've got 26,000 large dams in China. They've got nowhere to go after that. That's 26,000 dams is more than the rest of the world combined. And when we talk about a large dam, it's more than 15 meters in height, wall height, from the ground up. So the only way they can dam extra, the only place they can go, is the virgin rivers of Tibet. And you've got 2 virgin rivers here. One is the Tsangpo, which they started on, and the other one down here is the Salween, which was blocked by demonstrations for a long time. Under one of the premiers blocked it. There was a proposal for 13 dams on the Salween, but it never started. But now they've come back. They've got a new 10-year plan. So I'll just give you this information of what China plans to do. China plans to double its hydro potential within the next 10 years. It's far and away the world's greatest hydro user, but now it wants to double what it's doing. So this is, it's really insane what their objective is, and the justification for this is that this will reduce the use of coal because the hydropower is supposedly clean. Right? So if they want to do that, if they want to double from 200 gigawatts up to 430 gigawatts, the only way they can do it is to go to the rivers like the Yalong Sampo, the Yangtze, Upper Yangtze. So not the lower ones are already dammed. These ones down here, you got 3 gorges dammed down here, you got tons of dams along here. The only place to go is the Upper Yangtze, this area up here, and the Upper Mekong, and the Upper Salween, and then the whole of the Tsangpo, and then perhaps a little bit over here, but not so much. There's not much river left over there. so there's also plans to dam on the smaller one, like the Arun over here, the Karnali over here. Potentially, there is one dam on the Indus already. In terms of what could happen downstream, well, you can see what can happen downstream here with the Mekong. The Mekong goes through 6 different countries. It's going from here, it goes through China itself, it goes through Laos, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. And there is the delta at the other end. So there are 6 nations that are supposed to share that river, but according to China, that is not necessary. They'll just take everything for themselves. Because they have no international agreement. There's no international agreement that binds them to use, to share the water. There's no obligation for them to share the water. There's a thing called the UN Watercourses Convention, but that is non-binding, and China's not a signatory, and most of the other nations in South Asia are not a signatory either. So that doesn't really help. So what the UN should have done years ago, maybe 50 years ago, the UN should have set up an agreement where when you have a river that's shared by multiple nations, there should be an allotment. You know, you get so much water, the other country gets so much water, you share it. But there's never been a law passed like this. So the big dams really came into effect around the 1950s, 1960s. That's when China started building them. But now they're getting out of control because you have so many big dams, and they will have an impact on the water. So to give you an idea how big these dams are, there are 5 dams within Yunnan on the Chinese side over here. 5 big dams there that have finished. And the latest one which was finished is called Noisadu. It's 5.85 gigawatts, which is a quarter the size of the Three Gorges Dam. It's enormous. You know, it's got a wall height of, I can't remember the wall height, but some of these things go up to 300 meters tall. It's the height of an 80-story building, right? These are not small dams. These are big, big dams. So when you build a big dam like that, you can expect that there's going to be an impact on the ecosystem downstream and the ecosystem immediately in the same area. It's going to have an impact, there's no question. Some rivers that look like they come from Tibet actually don't come from the Irrawaddy, for example, this one here that goes in Burma. That actually, it's debatable whether it starts in Tibet or whether it starts in Upper Burma. But needless to say, I mean, there's feeders, there's other rivers that come in from Tibet. So if you look at the Ganges over here, the Ganges is actually, it's an Indian river. It starts in the Indian Himalayas. But look at the feeders. The Karnali comes in here, the Arun comes in here, and the Sun Kosi comes in here. They're all feeding in, and eventually the Brahmaputra joins it. So the feeders are feeding that river are coming from Tibet. So partially it's a Tibetan river. You could call it an Indian river, but it's also a Tibetan river because of the feeders that come in. But anyway, what's happening there's 2 things that are happening to the rivers. One is dams, and there's a huge projected plans for building dams all over those rivers. The other thing that's happening potentially is diversion of water. So there is, for a long time, Mao Zedong was the first to bring up this idea. Beijing over here is running out of water. And so their plan is to divert water from the south. This areas down here are water rich. They're rich, they got lots of water. So the idea is to divert water from here and send it up there, and in 3 stages, one in the middle going up here, and the 3rd section is to go from here to here, from the Yangtze to the Yellow. That has not been done yet, but it's on the drawing board. But we've also seen some other plans which would divert water from here and here, also going north, but potentially up northwest, not northeast, because of mining. It's potentially can go up here because of mining. For mining, you need lots of water. It's not just people that they're diverting the water for. It could be agriculture, it could be people, but increasingly it's mining. And the mining is very water thirsty. You need tons and tons of water to process coal. You need tons and tons of water to process any kind of minerals, copper. You need lots of water to process copper. So the thing that's coming up next, or potentially could come up next, is shale gas, shale oil, and tar sands oil, which chew up enormous quantities of water. And those would be exploited from these areas over here. That area here has tar sands. Areas over here have shale gas and shale oil. Those areas over there in Xinjiang. So the idea of sort of diverting the water over here would be to go for mining. So now you have 2 problems. One problem is the dams. The other problem is the diversion. And they go together because once you have a dam, it's easy to divert the water. You just use the dam as the conduit, and it goes through tunnels, whatever. so that you can redirect it. There's already a lot of diversion that goes on within China. And there's a lot of people that complain about it because they're getting robbed of their water source to give it to somebody else. The people down south, down here, they don't like this idea of water going up there. Why should they, why should they assist them when they're losing their own water source, right? So in terms of the nations downstream, these ones, of course, they're going to be in a very bad position if that water gets diverted. And there's also plans over here, we talk of plans over here to divert water from the Indus and the Sutlej also going north. This is only talk at this stage. But then you have to remember, China has had some projects where they thought that it was impossible, like the railway to Lhasa. Everybody thought that was impossible, and for a long time they couldn't do it. They tried it back in earlier. They tried it to do something in the 1980s, 90s, nothing worked. And then finally they found the technology to do this by freezing the permafrost somehow so that it worked. That's only possible since 2005, 2006 when the railway got to Lhasa. So a couple of things I would like to impress upon you that's happening, that's changing here. One is technology. The technology is changing. China is getting better and better technology to be able to do these things. It never had the technology before to send a railway to Lhasa. They have the technology now. They were able to do it through a lot of tunneling, and by using advanced techniques that they never used before with permafrost, by freezing the permafrost, which the idea they borrowed from Canada. And that has been successful so far. So they're introducing new technology. If you want to build a dam up here on the higher reaches, and the reason they haven't done it before is technology. They've not built up here before because it's not the same as damming down here. Damming down here is much easier because it doesn't freeze at night. If you go to the higher reaches, the area can freeze at nighttime because it's very, very cold, and they need special cement. They need special technology to be able to complete the dam. But now they're mastering this technology. They're finding out how to use it, how to do it. And then once they master that, then they can start building more and more dams upstream, right? The other thing that's happening is that the railway is accelerating everything that's happening, all the exploitation of Tibet. So once the railway gets down here to Lhasa, they can bring in the migrant workers. You need something like 20,000 migrant workers to make a dam. You bring them in on the railway, and then suddenly it's fairly fast to both exploit the minerals, and it's fairly fast and easy to bring in migrant workers to make the dams. So that is a big change, is the railway is accelerating everything, and the railway does not stop at Lhasa. The railway is going west to Shigatse. The railway is going east to Ningxi. Ningxi is, the reason they would be going east is mining. There's no particular large population out there. And none of this dam building is for Tibetans. China keeps saying, oh, we're bringing electricity to Tibetans, But you've got a population of Tibetans that's maybe, 30, 40,000, that you don't need a dam that's going to power the whole of Iceland for that population. That's not necessary. You don't need it. So the only reason that you need a large dam like that is to power up Chinese industry. And I'll introduce a new factor here for technology. Recently, they've introduced UHV lines, with ultra high voltage lines, which it's a European technology, copper-based lines, which instead of having the power be limited to one area like this, if it was limited, you had a dam over here, for example, instead of limiting the power to the local area, the UHV line can export the power to East Coast hubs using UHV lines. It can go down to Chengdu, Chongqing, or you can send it all the way to Shanghai. So instead of being based around here, it's going all the way over there. That changes the picture totally, because now you can build a big dam over there and have the power go somewhere else. And the way they're using this also in Burma, Chinese are building dams down here in cahoots with the Chinese military, and then that power goes back into China. It doesn't go to Burma. Burma desperately needs electricity, but it does not go to them. And so there's been a lot of fighting going on about these dams that are being built along the Irrawaddy and also the Salween in Burma, because the locals know that they don't get any benefits. They get nothing. All of the electricity will go back, and then the areas will be flooded. They won't have a place to live, so they get absolutely no benefits. That's why they're protesting about this. So anyway, I just want to move along a little bit here. I don't know if you can follow the features on this map, but there's a lot of countries downstream. We're looking at 10 countries downstream. And there's already been a lot of water fights going on already between, let's say, Pakistan, India. You've got some water problems in here. They had to share this. So basically what the agreement was, Pakistan got the Indus and India got the Sutlej. That was the agreement that they made to avoid a war because there was a lot of contention between the two. So India is damming the Sutlej and Pakistan is damming the Indus with Chinese help again. Chinese have a very strong hold in Pakistan. They're also building deep water ports down here. One down here, another one over here in Burma, trying to circle India in. Given this kind of picture, it looks pretty alarming for the countries downstream because what can they do about it? There's nothing much they can do to stop these dams. And what needs to be done is to preserve the rivers. Because if you don't preserve the rivers, then you're going to have a serious problem further down the line, right? But anyway, I'm going to move along here to another picture. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. I'm going to go here. This is Yamdrok in previous days, not recently, maybe 10 years ago. I sort of traveled around these areas for at least 20 years. And the first time, when you're traveling in Tibet, there was none of this, no dams, no mining, very little mining. None of this was apparent. This is what you saw 20, 25 years ago. You see these beautiful snow caps, beautiful blue lakes, turquoise lakes like Yamdrok. That's actually, the mountain is on the border of Bhutan. Tremendous landscapes. And you think, well, this cannot change. This will be here forever. Other travelers will come in 20, 30 years from now. They'll see this, it'll be the same, it'll be wonderful. That is not the case because what happened, you can't see it in the picture, but Chinese built a dam down here. It's actually out of the picture, it's down on this side. For no particular reason, it's a pump storage dam. They pump water out of the lake, and then they pump other water back into the lake from the Alang Sampo. I've never understood how this works or what. It's not sort of going downstream or anything. It's a pump storage lake. And I'm not a technical expert, so I can't explain what that would mean. All I know is that they pump water out of the lake, it goes back into, and then they pump water back in from the Alang Sampo to replace that water. But the Alang Sampo water is not the same water as the lake. The lake is glacial melt. And the Alang Sampo is also glacial melt, but not the kind, not the same kind. So what's going to happen in the end is this lake could be destroyed. And it's a very important lake. It's one of the top, most revered lakes in Tibet. Out of the top 4 lakes, this could be number 1. You got Lama Latso, you got Manasarovar, Namso, and this one. They're the top 4 lakes that everybody wants to circumambulate, everyone wants to see on a pilgrimage, right? So why would they upset the Tibetans by doing that? There's no particular reason. It doesn't generate much energy. It doesn't generate much power. And they used, I think it was German turbines. A German company came in, set up the turbines. Again, this lake is not the same as what it was before. It's never going to be the same after this project came in. It was highly controversial. There was some tunnel collapses. There was disasters happening at the site. They still managed to finish the project, right? But this is the Chinese mentality, is, it's almost like they're out to destroy things, which are, beautiful sites, and they set about destroying them. They don't see it as scenic beauty. They see it as an exploitation opportunity, almost. So, but I also wanted to introduce, probably don't have to tell Tibetans this, the idea of sacred landscape that Tibetans had thousands of years ago before the West. So, there was no such thing as a national park in old Tibet. But in a sense, a lot of it was national parks because they left everything alone. They didn't touch it. That's the idea of a national park. You don't touch anything. You leave the animals alone, let them do their thing. You leave the landscape alone. You don't touch the lakes. You don't touch the rivers. And in that sense, Tibetans were probably the first environmentalists in the world. They say that the concept of national park comes from Sri Lanka. It's actually also Buddhist, where one of the kings there decided that instead of hunting, he got a dressing down from some monk about how all animals value their lives, right? Everybody's equal. So then he turned it into a reserve and said that there'd be no more hunting in this thing. But that's exactly what they would do in old Tibet. Some powerful lamas would seal off a valley, like Everest Valley, and say, okay, no hunting in this valley, no killing. No, you can't change anything in the rivers. And of course, in this lake, there's a lot of fish, but Tibetans never fished, not in this lake. It's only since the Chinese came in that they fished. And the reasons for this is to do with the Nagas. which are the spirits that dwell in the lake. And if you fish, you disturb them. And if you disturb them, horrible things will happen to your crops, and maybe you'll get a skin disease for life or something. They come from Bon, animist faith. And so, a lot of these things were untouched for those reasons. So in that sense, they were environmentalists long before the West. I think the first national park in America was probably not until about 1850 that they declared a national park. They decided that they killed too many buffalo, and maybe it's a time for the animals to regroup and, keep a few animals around for biodiversity purposes, whatever. So you can see why they would consider this to be a sacred landscape. It's beautiful, fantastic scenery that you get when you cross Tibet, but now it's changing. So I'm going to go to something else here. Next one there. This is Kawakapo, that's in eastern Tibet, Kham area. And a lot of these are pilgrimage sites. This one is a pilgrimage site. They don't allow mountaineers to summit this peak. That's the same in Bhutan. You can't summit the top peak. I think it's, what's the top one? It's the highest unclimbed peak in the world is in Bhutan. And the reason it's the highest unclimbed peak is the Bhutanese won't allow people to summit it. You got Machu Picchu in Nepal. Can't summit that one either. It's a very tantalizing peak for mountaineers, but they're not allowed to climb it, right? So this one has never been summited, Kawakapo, that's the peak over here. For the simple reason, go back a little bit, sorry. Wrong button. For the simple reason that's Kawakapo there. For the simple reason that the Tibetans don't like the idea. They don't want anybody up there because you might disturb the spirits that dwell at the top. And that would be could be bad karma, right? Could be very bad news. So they think that, the belief is that there's all kinds of stuff at the summit. I'm not going to give you a list, but snow lions live on the top of the peaks. There's various yetis even are supposed to live up there as well. And some sort of goddesses. There's the Five Sisters peak associated with Everest. There's 5 sisters that dwell on those peaks, one on Everest and other 4 sisters on the other peaks. So what they like to do with these, the Tibetans prefer to do, is circumambulate them, not climb them, go around them. Long trek to go around, could take a week, could take 2 weeks. And then, you have temples associated with these, especially at Kailash, there's a lot of temples, and you're supposed to stop at each temple and make your offerings. So the maximum thing, let's go across here, sorry. Just going to switch a little bit here to the rivers. We came down from the glaciers there, come down to the rivers. The rivers of Tibet are they're the wildest rivers in the world. They're very, very powerful, very strong. A big challenge for the kayakers. As you can see a kayaker right over here, there. Now, you look how small the kayaker is compared to the river. It's a tributary of the Yalung Sangpo. It's called the Palung Sangpo. And this is the biggest whitewater in the world for kayakers. It's an immense challenge. It's like climbing Everest. It's the Everest of the whitewaters, right? So if they can get in there, they would like to do that. But nobody has actually covered the whole course of the Sangpo, including the Great Bend, because it's such a huge challenge. And there's so many drops and there's so many waterfalls and things in there. It's almost impossible. You'd have to do it at the really low flow. They've covered sections of it, but not the whole thing. So you get, rafting here, I've done some rafting, you get an idea of how powerful these rivers are, but Chinese are not looking at these rivers for these kind of purposes. They're looking at the river purely from exploitation point of view. So if it's a powerful river, they want to dam it. And let's go across here. So here's a dam under construction. I don't know if you can see down here, whoops, let's go across there. Down the bottom, you can see a person walking down there. Can you see that person there? That'll tell you how big that dam is. That's a person, that's 6 feet tall. The dam is enormous. This is on the upper Yangtze, under construction. I've lost count of the number of dams on the upper Yangtze. There's so many of them, you lose count. These are really big dams. So once you put a big dam like this in the river, you're creating a major blockage. You're blocking silt, you're blocking fish migration, you're blocking everything. You can't expect the river to be the same after you put a whole lot of concrete like that in the middle of the river. And behind the dam, at the back, you'll have a huge reservoir, which is dead water. There's nothing that lives in that water. It's, it's stagnant water, and it creates methane, which kind of offsets the idea of the dam. The dam is supposed to be green so that it doesn't give off carbon emissions, which coal does, but the disadvantage of the whole thing is that in the reservoir, it's giving off methane, and methane is 20 times more powerful than CO2, which means that you're not exactly being green by putting up a dam, not this sort of dam anyway. A big dam like this is creating big problems, mega dams, mega problems. And among the problems for the downstream countries would be silt. Silt is a kind of cocktail of all the nutrients that come from the rivers. Could be crushed up fish, snails, vegetation, lots of things that come in. So that for agriculture, you need silt. You don't just need the water, you need the silt that goes with it. And there's been cases, like for example in Egypt, where once the dam went up, they found the crops failed because they weren't getting the nutrients. So then they had to start using artificial fertilizer. I think it was the Aswan Dam. All the farmers found that the crops were failing, and the reason for that is the silt. Dams block silt. There's very few dams which are designed to let the silt through somehow, to filter the silt so that it comes through. And the silt is valuable for a number of reasons to the downstream countries. One is for agriculture, but the other one is the silt is coming down in a large volume, and it builds up the deltas. It's coming down constantly, so it builds up the deltas, and if your deltas don't get built up, they start sinking. And if they start sinking, then you've got a problem because the salt water will just come in from the ocean. And then it will invade the crops, which is happening in Bangladesh already. So a lot of these deltas are in trouble. These are the biggest deltas in the world. The Ganges, Brahmaputra, the Indus Delta, they're all sinking. This is not helping the situation by having dams along the course of the river. So I just want to jump along here to some impacts of this. This is actually a demonstration from Delhi back in November, climate change demonstration. Unfortunately, China tends to blame everything on climate change. If there's a problem, it said, oh, it's climate change, it's out of our hands, we can't do anything about it, it's not our fault. Point the finger at climate change. But when you think about it, China right now is causing the climate change because China is contributing roughly 25% of the CO2 that's going in the atmosphere is coming from China. US is 15%. India is about 6%, latest figures 2 years ago. So, China is driving climate change, so they can't really get away from this argument anymore because they're the ones that are putting up the CO2, and the black soot is coming up from fossil fuels from both India and China, and this is what's melting the glaciers. So the glaciers in the Himalayas are melting rather rapidly these days because of increased CO2 and also black soot. Black soot is the particles, tiny little black particles that come out of burning wood, coal, and lots of other substances, fossil fuels, and they go up in the atmosphere and they come down on the glaciers and they turn it a slightly darker shade of gray. And then when that happens, that absorbs more sunlight and then it starts melting faster. You can actually solve the black soot problem by changing your cooking methods or your heating methods, but China and India have not done that. You could solve it within 3 weeks. If everybody stopped burning coal, everybody stopped burning wood, it would be gone in 3 weeks, be dissipated. You can't do that with the CO2, but you can do it with black soot. But nobody seems to have the will or the technology or the way to do it to have clean cooking stoves. They've got them. I mean, for example, solar stoves, you can do it. So both India and China are increasing their coal output. It's insane. They're killing themselves. It's like shooting yourself in the foot because you're killing your water supply by doing that. Because glaciers, if they start melting too much, you won't have any water left for the rivers. It'll be gone. So what this slogan means here, if Tibet dries, Asia dies. Fairly accurate assessment of what's going to happen. It may not happen for 100 years, it may not happen for 200 years, maybe 300. But once the glaciers are gone, that's it. You don't have a river. You'll never have a river. The only river you're going to have is from monsoons, the monsoon rain, but that's irregular, and it's only 2 or 3 months a year. It's not enough to sustain a river. Actually, the Brahmaputra is heavily dependent on, it gets a lot of the flow from monsoon, but it also gets a lot from the glaciers. So the Indus is more 80-90% glacier fed, but the Brahmaputra is got a lot, because it's so wet on that side of Tibet, there's a lot of rainfall. So they get a huge flow from the monsoon. Anyway, this is actually Tibetan Women's Association, you can see down the bottom there, who have been involved in environmental things. So they've been showing up at demonstrations, and this is what, there needs to be more action like this to make people aware of what, how important Tibet is, and what's going to happen if Tibet doesn't function. What I'm talking about is the river systems. I'm not talking about the other things, which we should talk about also. So the end result of this, maybe in 50 years' time, we already have climate refugees. This is also the same climate change march in Delhi. You're going to get a huge increase in things called climate refugees. In Tibet itself, the Chinese have a name for nomads. They call them ecological refugees. And what that means is a sort of euphemism for people that are being kicked out of their land and no longer self-sufficient. So we already have 2 million of these people sitting, well, more than 1 million sitting in Tibet, which are nomads who've been kicked off their land. They used to be self-sufficient. They didn't ask for anything. They never needed money. They didn't even need money. Because what they would do is get everything from yaks. They get the yak cheese, yak butter. They barter that for grains, so they have no need for money. And suddenly they're being kicked off, the land's being grabbed, and they've been told they're ecological refugees. Why are they ecological refugees? Because climate change. China says climate change, the grasslands are changing. You're ecological refugees. And they kind of say, what? The nomads been looking after the grasslands for 4,000 years. They haven't had a problem. And now suddenly they got a problem. Where does the problem come from? It comes from mining, and it comes from fencing the grasslands. Those Chinese policies that have come in, that's what's been changing the grasslands. Nothing to do with climate change. It is to do with Chinese policy. And Chinese policy has killed large areas of grasslands. If you want to look at Mongolia, Mongolia used to have some of the biggest grasslands of this area. The grasslands are gone. I mean, there's not much left of the grasslands in Mongolia, increasingly out of Mongolia. And the reason for that is that they increased the number of Kashmir goats because they wanted to profit from the wool, which is sold to Europe. And unfortunately, Kashmir goats do not nibble the grass. They pull it out. It's not like yaks. Yaks will nibble at the grass and leave it alone. But Kashmir goats tend to pull it out, and they also have very sharp hooves that cuts up the soil. So what the increase of number of the Kashmir goats did was that it destroyed the grasslands. And then Chinese settlers came into Mongolia, and of course they planted vegetables. They dug up the grasslands to make their little farms and their vegetable plots. And suddenly you have a huge area of desertification. The desert starts expanding, which is also happening in Tibet. Desert's expanding quite significantly. The grasslands are dwindling. And then the other thing that's happening in Mongolia and also in Tibet is mining. And if you mine, you're going to dig up the ground. There's no question that's what you're going to do. When you dig up the ground, you loosen the soil. The crust that goes with the grasslands is disturbed. And then the wind strong winds that come through both Mongolia and Tibet, they'll pick up the dust and turn it into a dust bowl. And suddenly it rains down on Beijing. And they're saying, where does this dust come from? So there's been a couple of reversals in Chinese policy due to the fact that they find out they're shooting themselves in the foot. And one of the big reversals came in 1997 or 1998. There was a massive flooding on the Yangtze. And thousands of people killed, other people became refugees. And then the Chinese government investigated, said, well, why is this happening? And they sent in a group of scientists, and the scientists concluded that the reason it was happening was because they cut down all the trees on the eastern side of Tibet. That's why it happened. And then the question is, how much did they cut down? It sort of, the figures that we can get, they're not that accurate, but probably 50% of the forest from eastern Tibet is gone. It's logged since 1950. It started in 1950 because of Chinese greed for timber, lumber. They want the wood. They want to make furniture. They want to make chopsticks. But by doing that, by cutting down all of those trees, they've introduced another problem, which is flooding is not stopped by the trees, and then that can cause great devastation. So what happened after that, 1998, give an example of how Chinese policy works. They banned logging in eastern Tibet after that, and there was still poaching that was going on. There was illegal logging, but what the loggers did, or what the people who wanted the timber did, is they turned their attention to other parts of Asia. So they started buying up timber from New Guinea and Borneo, and they're still doing it in Burma, for example. Burma has a lot of teak. Teak is a very valuable wood for yachting industries and things like that. And they either poached it or they bought it legally, but they kind of decimated the forest in the other places like Borneo. And they decimated forests even in Siberia. the demand for wood is so great and the consumption is so great. So it kind of, what they did was they shifted the problem to somewhere else. And that's a typical Chinese thing to do, is you've got a problem over here, let's shift it somewhere else. Let's move it. They're not solving the problem. What they're doing is they're shifting it. And this is the case with a lot of things, you know, not just the forest, it's also the case with the dams. If a dam is stopped, they'll try and shift it to another location. Same company, different location. But anyway, I just want to, how are we going for time here? Have I talked a lot?
I think 5 minutes.
Oh, dearie me. Anyway, there's a lot more in this book. There's a lot more in this book. The reason I call this book Meltdown in Tibet, meltdown in English has many, many different meanings. And the first meaning you would get out of this would be glaciers. The glaciers are melting. But there's something else you want to think about, which is permafrost. The permafrost is melting in Tibet. And that may not mean much to you, but Tibet has the greatest area of permafrost outside of the Arctic and the Antarctic. It's got the biggest store of ice. And if that ice starts melting in the ground, it changes all the vegetation, it changes the vegetation patterns, it changes the farming, it changes the way the grasslands are, it changes lots of things. There's not been too much scientific evidence on what happens, but you have this natural problem that's happening, which is the meltdown of the glaciers, the meltdown of the permafrost, and what the Chinese are doing, they're not helping any of this matter because they're making it worse. They're making it worse by playing around with the different policies on the grasslands, and then, so they're causing an environmental meltdown themselves. And they've only got themselves to blame for that, because nobody else has been introducing these policies of moving the nomads off the grasslands, building big dams, and building lots of big mines, which is also happening after the railway. Anyway, I think I've probably talked enough. Have I?
Yes.
Good, okay. So
I think this part of the session, the audience will interact with Michael Buckley. So if you have only questions are allowed, no comments.
and reasonable questions.
Right. And before you ask your questions, please state your name and your organization.
I'm John Gaudette with the Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy. I was wondering if you could talk about what corporations are involved in building the dams and the mining, if it's predominantly state-owned enterprises from China, or if it's Canadian mining companies, or who else? Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Is it on? Okay. Question is to do with foreign mining corporations? Okay. As far as I understand, you can check out the site by International Rivers. They do a lot of the tracing of who's building those dams and who's financing them. So there's internationalrivers.org. It's based out of Buckley, California, and it's very, very good on the rundown. Okay, most of the financing is done by Chinese state banks. So if you want to finger somebody, it would be Chinese leadership, because they're the people that are running all the banks, and they're the people that are running the big corporations that are doing these dams. Huaneng, I believe it is, has an exclusive contract for the Mekong. No other company can build on the Mekong dams. So they seem to award a particular company, which is state-run also, a particular river. The Three Gorges is the one that's running all the dams on the Three Gorges. They're building Shilwadu Dam, which is the number 2 or 3 in the world in size. That's also Three Gorges Dam. And not only that, these companies will go to Africa, or they'll go to Burma, or they'll go to other parts of Asia, and they will finance the dam, and they will build it, and they'll bring in Chinese workers, not a local worker, they don't want local workers. Everything is done by China. The workers, the planning, the financing, everything is done by Chinese consortiums. So the simple way to put an end to these dams, or put an end to the diversion, they can just stroke of a pen, they can cancel the dam. Very, very easy. The mining, a lot of Canadian companies were involved in Tibet at the beginning. There's only about 3 or 4 of them left now. And the reason they got involved is because China doesn't have the technology to develop these dams. But as soon as they get that technology and they copy it, that's the thing they've been doing over the last 50 years, is stealing technology. They still do it on a big scale. They're stealing industrial secrets all the time, cyber warfare. As soon as they get the technology, they boot the company out. They're not interested in a Canadian company making a profit. All they're interested in is the technology. And Canada happens to have the most advanced mining technology in the world, not just in Tibet, but in many other countries too. But there's other companies involved now. Will be BP, Shell, and Total, and also ExxonMobil. They'll be after the fracking and the tar sands extraction. But again, Canada's in the fore because we have the world's worst technology, or the best technology for extracting oil sands. And China just bought 2 major companies in Alberta a couple of years ago, last year. Big companies. They paid billions of dollars for these companies in the oil sands area. And the reason they're doing that is they want the technology, for sure. Once they get the technology, they'll use it. They'll apply it in Xinjiang and they'll apply it in. So there has been some pressure that has been put on the Western companies, but in fact, Canada now is less involved than it was before. Now the focus is going to shift to BP, Shell, which are European companies, based out of England, Holland. Total is French. All of them have very bad environmental records. That's why they're involved with China. Otherwise, if they were ethically concerned, they wouldn't be involved with China at all, because they would realize that things are not working properly. You know, so did that answer your question? Sort of. Okay. I should mention that I'm not an expert on everything. I just do a lot of research, but you know, you can't be an expert on all of the fields that are involved here. There's a lot of fields involved. We didn't talk too much about mining, but that's on a huge scale right now. It's a frightening scale that's coming up into that because the railroads getting there.
Hello. Hello. My name is Tenzin Nima. I work in Cabinet Secretariat. My question is, people have been fighting over power, politics, wealth, and some scholars say that there will soon be a water war. So, in reference to Tibet being a third pole and major Asian countries, which are being impacted by construction of dam by Chinese. So I would just like to ask you your opinion. What do you think about it? Do you agree with this point that there will soon be a water war, first of all? And secondly, I just want to ask, in case there will be such problem, what do you think is the best solution to resolve? Although negotiations were made before over international rivers, but it were failed. So what do you think could be done to solve this problem?
Okay, so the first question is, are there going to be water wars? Yeah, there's going to be scarcity of water, there's going to be problems over water, so there's going to be a lot of tension. I don't know about a war. Who's going to take China on in a war? Nobody's, I mean, the only people who have been successful would be Vietnamese when they got invaded. They pushed China back. That was successful, but they were battle-hardened Vietnamese, have been fighting people for 100 years. So they gave the Chinese quite a shock. But I don't think anybody's powerful enough, certainly not India, who's powerful enough to take China on if it comes to a water war. But Brahma Chelani is an Indian strategist. He says that the war has been declared without a shot being fired. The war is already on with water, but no shot has been fired. China has declared war without a single shot being fired. That's what he says. And I would agree with that. China claims sovereignty of all of this water. It doesn't care what happens downstream. It said as much. It said, this water belongs to us. We can do what we want with it, which is not sitting very well with the countries downstream, because they're used to getting their, water's been coming downstream for thousands of years, and suddenly water's going to be different. So I'm not so sure that anybody will want to take China on. They'd have to be very, very powerful to do it. And if you looked at the South China Sea, the only person that can take them on there is the US fleet. China claims the whole of the South China Sea for resources. So that's a kind of test case, because there is a law backing that up. Anyway, in terms of laws, in the South China Sea, you have a law called UNCLOS, which is the law of the sea. 200 nautical kilometers from your coast belongs to you for exploitation. Nobody else can use it, only that country. But China has flouted that. It says, claims an island off the Philippines, which is thousands of miles away from China, and says that's ours. But they've signed this document. They've signed UNCLOS. So they don't care about agreements. Even if they signed it, it still doesn't mean anything to China. So the only agreement that we have is the UN Watercourses Convention, signed in 2014, but China didn't sign it, and nor did most of the Asian nations either. And that says that you should share, it has some guidelines for sharing transboundary rivers, but it's useless. It's UN, it has no binding force, and most of the nations haven't even signed it anyway. So the problem is that we're 50 years behind the ball. You know, these laws should have come in when the big dams were started to be built, but they were never brought in. They should have brought them in immediately. Once you get a big dam like that, you need a law. It's a change of technology. And, you know, it's like every new technology. When you get cell phones, there's no laws for the first couple of years, and suddenly there's a law that says, okay, you can't use a cell phone when you're driving because it causes an accident. But it takes a long time before that law comes in. And there's a period. So we're in this period now where there's no laws. It's a lawless thing, and China's taken advantage of it because there's no laws about mega dams and what impact they have. There's no impact assessment. They're not doing any impact assessment on what's going to happen to the country downstream. They're going to lose all their water. What's going to happen? It's going to be polluted. You know, they should have done something long ago at the UN, but they never did. And, you know, then there's a question of, is China going to even allow that to proceed, because it will try and block it at the Security Council or something like that. It will jump on it straight away. But I think Brahma Chalani had it right, which is the war is already on. It's just you're not aware of it. It's happening. And, you know, there have been war between Pakistan and India over the water sources, but they've resolved it with an agreement. Both of them are not happy about it, but at least they got an agreement. And the one that's getting really hammered is Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is getting assaulted from all sides. It's dams on the Indian side. There's rising sea levels. Bangladesh is very flat. That's the one that's going to be really affected by all of this stuff, and climate change as well. So, and they're a very weak nation. They just don't have that much power, but they got a huge population to take care of compared to other Asian countries. Population of Bangladesh is 165 million, compared with, let's say, Vietnam, I'm not sure, is 70 million or something like that. It's much, much bigger in population than the Southeast Asia side of things. So the laws don't exist, and China's taken advantage of that for, you know, to do whatever it wants. We got some more questions?
Hello, my name is Shirab. I work for the Tibet Voice Institute. You have been credited for writing the first ever guidebook of modern Tibet, and that was in the big 80s, I believe. Now, if you were to write it again, rewrite it today, what would be the three main changes that you would make?
Well, actually, I still do a guidebook. That's not long the plan. I do one for Brad guides. I still do a guidebook which is updated maybe every 3 or 4 years. I don't know if I'll be going back there myself for the next update. I might send somebody else in. But no, I've included all these things about environment in the guidebook. So I'll talk about how it's changing. You know, when I do a guidebook, I'm not going to present it as a nice tourist brochure or something like that. I give the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've always expected that from the guidebook. I don't want the sanitized version. I want to know what's going on, right? That's the value of this guidebook versus something else that the Chinese might produce. I mean, the Chinese produce guidebook, and they have them in Lhasa. They won't tell you anything about dams. It won't tell you anything about mining. It won't tell you anything about nomads. All it will say is that everything is wonderful. So I think it's the obligation of the guidebook writer to write it up the way it is, you know, good, bad, and ugly. And there's a lot of good things in Tibet. There's wonderful landscapes. I mean, you got the highest mountains on earth. You got the deepest gorges on earth. You might have trouble getting to see them, but they exist. And, you know, breathtaking landscapes. You get up to Kailash. This is a wonderful, fantastic scenery. And Kailash is so far west, it's not affected so much by these changes. But I will also point out that there's a lot of bad changes going on. And, you know, the landscape, even the landscape can change, you know, things that you thought were unchangeable. You know, they used to think that the ocean, you could not change the ocean. The ocean is so big, nothing can affect the ocean. It's too big, right? But unfortunately, what's happening, the ocean is being destroyed. It's acidifying. Wildlife is disappearing from the ocean. Marine life is going. The sharks are practically gone, you know. There's so much garbage in some areas it forms its own islands. It's possible. These big things can be taken down because you can't, you know, sooner or later, cumulative effect, it starts building up, then things get destroyed. So you think of Tibet, okay, it's impossible to destroy Everest. You know, you can't. That's a huge mountain. It's the biggest in the world. But the fact is that the mountaineers going up there now, they're finding less and less snow up there on the upper reaches. It's all rock, and things are changing. It's not what it was before. There's subtle changes going on. The glaciers are, you know, receding. Not so much at Everest, but on other peaks around that area. There's less glacial cover. And then the glaciers, when they melt, they form lakes. And these lakes build up and they're quite dangerous. And if the lake builds up, it's like a small dam, and if it breaches, it takes out a whole village or whatever below. And these lakes exist in Tibet, in Bhutan, Nepal, and if they break, because they've just built up from mud and debris, if they break, they'll just wipe out whole villages as they go down. And if you look at satellite images now, you can see these lakes, which is the result of glacial melting. So it's proof that the glaciers are melting. If you wanted some proof, you can see these lakes, they're expanding, especially ones in Nepal. Huge problem in Nepal and Bhutan, because they're on the lower side of the Himalayan range, whereas Tibet, it's a little bit more flat on the top, the higher elevations, right? So anyway, I'm not intending to do too much more guidebook stuff with Tibet, but I sort of shifted over to environmental issues instead.
My name is Meltdown from Finance Department. This is one
You want to know about the finances for the day?
very wonderful talk, and really, really thanks for this the research that you have. Do you have any plan to give this such kind of awareness talk, not only to Tibet, but also because all this problem is affected to all the lower developing countries. So do you plan to actually have this awareness to, let's say, Bangladesh or Vietnam or Pakistan, India?
Oh, yes.
To sort of build a coalition to really stop this disaster.
Yeah, well, I mean, I talk all over the place. I've been in Hong Kong, Singapore, I'll go to Burma next month. Well, they call it Myanmar, I call it Burma. Yeah, I do talks around the place, and but the thing is, these countries are a little bit slow on the uptake. I mean, they're not banding together. There's a thing called ASEAN, it's Southeast Asian nations, and they tried to call a vote to stop China expanding in the South China Sea, but it was shot down by Cambodia, which is under China's thumb, and they never got the vote going because China's afraid when all these countries gang up together. It looks sinister. They don't like it. They prefer to do one-on-one. But now what's happening is Vietnam has linked up with the Philippines to take a case to court over China's claims in the South China Sea. And China does not like it when these two countries get together. It says, no, separate case, sort of divide and conquer, this kind of thing. So definitely if they all got together, but the problem is that some of them are in bed with China, like Cambodia, Hun Sen. He's been a dictator, he's been there for 40 years. It's propped up by China. I mean, the person is propping him up. It's the same as Burma, Burmese military. They're heavily engaged with China, but less so in the last couple of years because Aung San Suu Kyi managed to get out of house arrest and, they attracted other investments. And then Pakistan is increasingly under China's control, and so is Nepal. I mean, Nepal is notoriously under China's control. They're building roads everywhere in Nepal. They're taking over they're contributing to their armed forces. They don't. So are these countries going to suddenly turn around and criticize China? I don't know. The one that would do it is India. But even India has not been very effective at getting any water sharing agreements. They got zip, they got nothing. Modi was up there, he talked to them about, and they said, yeah, that's nice. But he never got an agreement. The only agreement they got was the Chinese said they would reveal statistics on the flow of the Brahmaputra, but the Indians had to pay for that data. That was not even free. But what you need monitors on these rivers from India, checking the flows and what's happening with the dams, but they won't allow that for obvious reasons that it won't look very good. But you need monitors from international groups of some sort or other groups to check out what impact that dam is having on the nations downstream. But that's what my emphasis would be, was that, a lot of people don't give a damn about human rights, but they do give a damn when you turn their plumbing off. When you change their plumbing, they get very upset. So, of course, these nations are worried about it, especially the Mekong, because the Mekong it's entering a stage where it's going to could be a dead river in a short period of time because there's so much pressure on it now. They're building dams in Laos itself. Yeah, I mean, I always look at this map. Well, one of the solutions is to turn the map the other way. You turn it upside down, then the pressure would be, you know, the water's going the other way. It would be China's problem. What would China do if it was downstream? China would be declaring war, wouldn't it? I mean, that's what China would do, be in a position of power. If it was downstream, it would be screaming and howling. Say, no, you can't do that. No, you must give us this agreement and so on. But for China, it's fortunate for them that everything is downstream. They're all upstream. I think all of their rivers are upstream. There's only a few exceptions in the north, around Russia somewhere. So they don't have to negotiate. They've got all the cards, right? They're not in a position where they have to do anything. So they're just sitting there and not worrying about what the other nations think. And they're not very good at dialogue. China's strong point is not dialogue. China's main point is silencing everybody. That's what they're good at. Keep everybody silent so they don't criticize. You know, we had some interesting interactions because we had one person presenting similar material in the States, in New York, and they had Chinese students in the audience. They invited them, and they don't want to criticize the Chinese government. They refuse to criticize the Chinese. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be dams, could be anything. It doesn't matter what it is. They won't take on the Chinese government because they're afraid of China. And, that's what China does. It's very good at silencing the opposition. That's what they've done to Tibetans. You know, they silence them. That's what they try and do to the foreign press, but they're not so successful with that. So, I don't know. It's a very dire situation that way.
Yeah, sort of grassroots awareness for the people.
Yeah, grassroots awareness, but then you've got to demand something.
The government level is difficult, but actually at the people level, those who are really directly affected by it and who depend on this river.
Yes.
So you'll be able to create sort of.
But you know, what's going to happen, I think, instead, is that you're going to develop a system where you get climate refugees, which is one of the pictures I was showing you there, where people have to accept the fate that they're no longer able to live in that ecosystem the way they did before, fishing and farming off the river. They're refugees. They're going to have to move somewhere. And did you know that, India has built a fence around Bangladesh the entire way. And the reason for that, they said it's to stop smuggling, but that's baloney. The reason they're doing it is they don't want Bangladeshi refugees flooding into India. And the fence, I've seen the fence. I've seen the fence in Bangladesh. It's a double row of barbed wire. It's a wire fence, double row, just like a prison. And of course, you could tunnel under it, or you could possibly cross on the river, whatever. But that's an elaborate, really elaborate thing for them to be building all the way around Bangladesh. I don't know if they've finished it yet. The Bangladeshis will deny that there is such a fence, and so will the Indians. But I've seen it on a map in a National Geographic, actually, and it's something like 2,500 kilometers long. And what does this tell you? It tells you they're worried about climate refugees. They're worried because they know what's coming. Bangladesh is going to be the first thing that's going to be hit. For sure, it's going to be Bangladesh. They're just very low. They're getting flooded from sea level. They're getting flooding from the north. They're going to get hammered. So they're going to start thinking, let's go to somewhere else. And, predictions are that, Bangladesh could be like 30% underwater in the next 50 years. It's quite possible. So where are those people going to go? They're going to try and go to India, of course. Or they could go the other way into Burma. I don't know if they'd be much more successful in Burma than where they are right now. But these are the strange solutions that people come up with, I'll give you another example of solutions. The Bangladeshis know that the sea level is rising and that there will be salt coming into their crops. So what's their solution? They're trying to grow salt-resistant rice. That's their solution, so that it will be okay to have the salt water coming in. But that doesn't solve the problem. The problem is the saltwater intrusion. You've got to do something about that rather than trying to change the rice crops, So solutions are rather strange, the ones that people are looking at. But for sure there will be millions of climate refugees, not just Bangladesh, all over the whole region. And that's what people will say. Will say, okay, so the system has changed. You can't fish here, you can't farm here, so now you're a refugee. Go somewhere else. That's a climate refugee, a euphemism for people that have been kicked out due to other causes, We got time for a few more?
Last question.
Are we running a little over time or what?
We running. Right. So last question.
My name is Vincent. We've been working in Tibet Policy Institute. My question is on the statistical point of view, or what do you think where they are more emphasizing, either on the wider water diversion. China has the South-North China water diversion project because most of the northern part of the northwestern part of China is arid, which they require water. And then the dams that they are used for hydro projects. Because in Tibet they also have solar and wind in projects to generate more electricity. So statistical point of view, where you are, what do you think? Because the evidence for hydroelectricity, the water remains in the great. But if you diverting the water itself, you are taking it to another part. So I think impact is more in that diversion.
Okay, is the question about the impact or the
impact of
the impact? Okay, there's not a lot of water diversion going on just yet. It's in planning stages. So there is water diversion going on the east coast of China. That's already done. The canal that goes from the south to the north, it's already operational. One problem they've discovered there is they're diverting polluted water. So it's not terribly useful when it comes in because it's polluted. The middle section of the south to north is underway, well underway. The western section, which is Tibet, is not been touched yet. It will be started at some point. So there's not major water diversion going on yet. But there is water diversion going on a smaller scale to get water for mining. For example, mines in Gyama and so on, they've diverted water away from crops, from agriculture, to get it to the mine because they need tons of water to process what they're doing. So there is minor diversion going on. But if I understand your question, it's more about which has the more impact? Which has the greatest impact? Well, right now the dams are having the greatest impact. You know, Tibet has enormous capacity for solar energy. It's probably number 2 after Sahara. So if they wanted to use solar energy, which they do in a lot of places, there's a huge potential for solar, but it's much more expensive form of energy. And solar is not 24 hours like damming is 24 hours. But dams depend on the flow of the river. Sometimes in the winter the flow is lower, and in the summer the melt, it's higher. So it will fluctuate. But right now, solar is far too expensive compared to hydro. To get the same number of gigawatts, 1 or 2 gigawatts, you need a huge area of solar panels to generate. With the dam, you can do it. So Tibet has huge potential for wind power, solar, geothermal, hydro. The place has not been touched. What did Tibetans do about this? They never used wind power. They used it for prayer flags. That's about it. That's the only engineering they've ever done on these lakes is put up a whole lot of prayer flags, right? That's about. Huh? Yes. Well, water mills to grind, but that was not very common. There was a few water mills. Okay, there was one guy that came back in the 1940s. He actually set up a small generator in Lhasa, which is hydropower. He's one of the rugby boys. And that was successful, but it broke down. By the time Aufschneider got there, the Austrian engineer, it was non-operational. And there were plans to fix that. I think if the power was used sensibly, there's good hydro and there's bad hydro. And I'm not going to explain it in a few minutes, but you can't get away. Every country has hydro, or most of them except for Singapore. Hong Kong doesn't have hydro, but most countries have hydro, and they're not going to give up their hydro. That hydro is here to stay. It's a question of what kind of hydro are you using, So I mean, there's television, there's good television, there's bad television. I mean, you can have useless programs that have no educational value, and people sit there in a daze and watch them for 24 hours. So is that good television? I don't think so. But you can have educational television where people learn a lot of things, and that was the original promise for television. So I'd make the same case for dams. There's good dams and there's bad dams. And the good dam is a run-of-the-river dam with no reservoir, and it's a small dam. It's not a mega dam. It's not like Three Gorges. It's not like 22 gigawatts, which is going to have enormous impact on the environment and cause a lot of landslides. It's a smaller dam, and it's well-engineered, and they do something with the silt. Somehow they deal with the silt, so the silt goes through. And if you've got a really good dam, they'll actually make it possible for the fish to go upstream. We got some of those in Canada. They're fish ladders, but that's a very, very small dam. There's no fish that can go over 300 meters. There's no fish can do this unless a bird picks up the fish at the base and takes them over the other side. It's just not on. You can't do it. So you've blocked your fish migration by any dam that's bigger than 10 meters. It's going to block them. So, I don't think we're going to, just think about Singapore though. I was in Singapore a few months ago. No nation in the world is more careful with their water than Singapore. And that reason is they have no mountains, they have no water sources, they have no rivers. So what do? They import water from Malaysia, 30–40%. They desalinate the water from the ocean. They get another 20% from that. And the rest is recycled. They're very, very careful about recycling their water. They use every single drop carefully, and they do it. And they're a very successful nation. They have no hydropower. They're using solar power. They have huge areas. They use rooftops. They're using hydro quite a lot. They're expanding the hydro. But here's a country that's been successful without hydro. It's possible. I mean, you can use alternative forms of energy. But unfortunately, what's happening in China is they're not only doubling their hydro, they're also attempting to increase their coal production, year on year. Is not reducing it. They're not reducing it at all. It's going to go up and up until the year 2022, they say. And then maybe they'll consider it tapering it off. But, that's going to kill the environment because their emissions are just going through the roof. And there's no stopping them, And their argument is that they're allowed to have the period that the West had, which was the Industrial Revolution. They're allowed to have this dirty period for a while to, before they can get cleaner again. That's one of their standard arguments. And the other argument is, well, nothing we can do about climate change. It's here. It's with nothing we can do about it. In fact, there is plenty of things you can do about climate change. You can, in Ladakh, they're building artificial glaciers. It's one of the things that they're doing to regenerate the water flow twice a year instead of once a year. Guys come up with artificial glaciers. Are they doing this in China? No, they're doing cloud seeding. They're trying to create rain by dropping bombs in the clouds. Total waste of time. It's a question of energy resources and what's good and what's viable, what works. And I would say there's good energy and there's good ways of doing it and there's bad ways of doing it. And I think the problem with China is they're just too greedy. They want so much power and then they want more power. And then they want more power on top of that. And there's just no end to what they're consuming. Biggest consumers of everything. Biggest consumers of copper, biggest consumers of gold, biggest consumers of lots of minerals. Lithium, probably the world's #1 consumer. I'm not sure about that statistic, but there's just no stopping them. What their economical miracle requires. It just requires more and more resources to be used. And I haven't even touched on the other areas where China has a very bad reputation. Consuming elephant ivory, rhino horns for no particular reason, destroying whole biodiversity, which is one thing I haven't really talked about, but biodiversity is very important. Biodiversity, everything we get is from biodiversity. Your clothing, your food, everything comes from wild sources originally. And if you start destroying that, then you're destroying your options for future medicines, future food sources, lots of future things. But that's what they're doing. So.
So, on behalf of the Tibet Policy Institute and all of us gathered here, I would like to thank Michael Buckley for truly this fascinating talk on a very depressing topic. But we certainly hope that your book, which I forgot to mention in my introduction, which I had the privilege of reviewing in the Hindustan Times for the what the literary agent called the pre-launch review, will go a long way in educating people downstream on the relevance and importance of river waters coming from Tibet. And we certainly hope that, as Mr. Mututoji said, your book will be responsible for creating an effective coalition of nations, downstream nations, to counter any potential misuse by China of the river waters from Tibet. And also, on behalf of the Tibet Policy Institute, I would like to thank the audience for your time and for your attention. And as a token of our appreciation, I would like to inflict Michael Buckley with a very boring book.
Oh, thank you.
It's on history. It's our first inaugural edition of our
talking about power.
Policy magazine.
Thank you.
I hope you'll have time to go through it. And
thank you.
thank you.
Great, thanks. Can I just talk a little bit while I get this one?
Right, I'll say a few words.
Oh, okay, sure.
On your book.
Okay.
Before we let Michael Buckley go, I would like to announce that in his generosity, he has decided to have a free author-signed distribution of paperback copies of his book. So should I announce each department?
Yeah,
by
if you want.
department, and then you sign it, or do you want to say a few words?
I'll say a few words first. I'm not sure the microphone's
lights are
working.
off.
The lights are off. That doesn't work. Well, it might have been battery. Could have been battery operated. You never know. No, I'd like to thank Thupten Sampel from TPI for putting this together and organizing it, and also for reviewing the book. He did the first review of this book, actually. And within TPI, you have a EDD, Environmental Development Desk. Temper is from EDD. So there's several Tibetan organizations that are tackling the environmental problems and looking at them and disseminating information. And also TWA, Tibetan Women's Association, is very active. But I think we need a lot more action, need a lot more activists on behalf of Tibet to make people aware of what's happening, because you can't replace Tibet. You know, once Tibet's gone, once those rivers are gone, you can't bring them back. You know, it's like once you get a desert, it's hard to bring it back to grasslands again. So I'd like to thank Thupten Sampel for putting this together. And we have some books to hand out here.
So
I think.
please, I'll announce the department to receive Michael's Losa gifts for all of us.
There you go.
My colleague Sunam Nubata.
Right. So I'll just sign this one. Yeah, that's okay. Okay. Okay, for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mudu Dodra. Dasala, Tisun Lebu.
There you go. Thank you. Ah.
Nancy, next week.
There you go. There you go.
Chetan, you are. Shidi Lebu.
Thank you.
The Department of Education.
Oh, right. Okay.
Churi Lebu. You are.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. What's this one? Okay. Tibet Policy Institute. Oh, yeah, that's
My
you.
colleague,
All right, okay. Thank you.
Come, one of you. This is for the human rights.
Oh, TCHRD. Okay. TCHRD is actually in his interview with Tsering Tomo. Yeah.
She is out of town.
She's out of town? You'll have to accept it on her behalf then. Okay. Because I took some mining stuff from her. Well, she's in a documentary too. Well, say hello to her. And I believe she already has a copy, a hardcover.
Okay.
But that's an extra copy that she'll be pleased to have, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Been busy over there.
Library.
Oh, library. Hang on. Library needs a few more. Wait a minute. Where's my bag? Because your library? Okay, I need to give extra ones to the library. Wait a minute. Let me.
You want your bag?
Yeah, I'll get the bag over there. Wait a minute. How about 3? 3 for the library? Yeah, okay, that's good. But I'm going to give you not that bag, the other bag. The big bag. I got one hardcover.
Meanwhile, could you sign?
Yeah,
for
sure.
the Kashan
Can you wait for a
tab?
minute? Yeah? It'll be worth waiting, don't worry. Okay. let's
Kashan,
see.
email you that.
Hey, lights again. Yeah.
Kashan, email from.
Okay, thank you. No, I want to get. I'm going to get a hardcover from here. They're in the side. Yeah, it's in the side there. Well, we can take it at a time. This is the other division. Okay, wait a minute. Hang on, extra one. Where's our library man? Oh, okay, this is yours here. Wait a minute. You want it signed or not signed? Signed. Okay. Well, all right. Okay, that's for Department of Classification. Oh, that's yours. Okay. So what I'll do, you get one hardcover as well. This is a hardcover, and this is soft. This will last longer, which is what you want for a library book, right? Just let me get those going. Well, what's this one?
This is planning.
Oh, planning section. Okay, planning commission. Okay, planning. I can give you some work. No. Oh, yeah, I've already got some over here for him.
All right.
Yeah.
This is for the audit department.
Okay.
Supreme Justice.
Okay. Thank you.
So these, do you want to sign them, and we'll, the representatives are not here. We'll
Okay, you can distribute them later.
Right,
Yeah, yeah.
tomorrow.
Okay. And so we got some for the library here.
Right, please.
And what about TPI itself? Well, we can work out that later.
Right.
TPI, maybe give some copies for EDD.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, the hard copy.
Right. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay. So this is the library, right? Okay. Okay, that's one for library. I get two more for you, right? So the library gets more. Hang on, this is library. Okay, LDWA, right? Let's see. Okay, that's another one for you, and then you get this one too because this is going to last longer. But